What's up, Final fans? It's the warrior of hype for Final Fantasy XVI. For this video, I'm going to highlight things that I found to be cool or interesting from interviews and preview articles. I will not talk about the demo in this video, so if you're concerned about story, spoilers, and just trying to go in blind, avoiding that demo altogether, fret not and continue watching. Sal Romano of Gematsu.com conducted an interview with a core group of Final Fantasy XVI's developers. Producer Naoki Yoshida had this to say about what Final Fantasy XVI is. Quote, Final Fantasy XVI has been developed with a focus on four main pillars, things that players have come to expect from the games in the series. So first and foremost, narrative. For this game, we want to go back to the rich, high fantasy roots of the series, something that was complex and interwoven, something that touched upon politics and justice and values that would not only be appealing to younger fans just stepping out into the world, but older fans who have experienced a lot themselves. One thing that was important to us, though, was to tell a story that was complete from beginning to end. And at that, I think we have succeeded. To facilitate this, there are over 11 hours of cinematic cutscenes in the main scenario alone, all seamlessly interwoven into the game experience, playing in-engine, in real time. And second, we have a vast ensemble cast. Each character is unique in their backgrounds and motivations, and each has their own unique arcs that play out throughout the narrative. And while the main focus is on Clive Rosfeld, as he seeks vengeance for the loss of his family and nation, through this journey, players will witness the fates of the remaining cast collide. Naoki Yoshida also told Sean Keane of CNET, quote, when those credits roll and the players experience the whole story, I want them to feel that they can move forward onto tomorrow, no matter what happened today. End quote. Captain Cosmic on Twitter says, what excites me the most is hearing about Cid's influence on Clive. I always want that element of hope. The next two pillars are visuals and gameplay. I will talk about visuals in the next video, and I've already compiled highlights of gameplay information in the previous video. Please check out those for more Final Fantasy XVI hype. At FFXVI_hub on Twitter shares an interview with Well Played. The team was asked to name media and games that inspired them during the development of Final Fantasy XVI. Yoshida says that A Song of Ice and Fire books and the Game of Thrones HBO series were his inspirations, as well as one of his favorite movies of all time, The Dark Knight. That movie featured a relationship between light and dark and their dependency on each other, which is a theme that will be seen in Final Fantasy XVI. Director Hiroshi Takai was inspired by Game of Thrones as well, and something I talked about in great detail during my gameplay information video, God of War was also a main source of inspiration for Takai, and it certainly shows. Combat director Ryota Suzuki says that while nothing directly inspired his design process for the game, he is a big fan of John Wick and Blade. And that's the thing, creativity is a product of inspiration and inspires other creatives. So when people say, it's just Game of Thrones but Final Fantasy, I say, Game of Thrones was inspired by Lord of the Rings, which inspired Dungeons and Dragons, which inspired Final Fantasy. There's obviously many other things that inspired those things that I listed. It's not that people are completely wrong in drawing comparisons of Final Fantasy XVI to Game of Thrones, but the comparisons just wouldn't stop there. This goes for pretty much any work of art. And what has me super excited is that everything that they listed as inspirations is freaking greatness. Turquoise Hammer translates a 4Gamer interview and reports that Clive lives with Sidolphus and his resistance group. Now, Final Fantasy XVI Hub on Twitter reports that this group is called Hideaway. Yoshida tells Sohu, tweeted by Turquoise Hammer, that the base Clive returns to after each story section will house Moogles who will give Clive information about various formidable monsters to be found throughout the realm. This is likely how Clive will accept monster hunts. Now back to the 4Gamer interview, you can expand the base by completing side quests. Side quest content takes up nearly half of the contents of the game. Grinding for gil and XP is not required. You can just follow the story and should have enough gil to buy the best gears for the story missions. Also at hideouts, you can learn about the history of Valisthea and the characters. Additionally, for the lore enthusiasts, Clara Herzog of the PlayStation blog writes, quote, "To support this rich narrative, Final Fantasy XVI will feature a brand new system called Active Time Lore, or ATL for short. It's kind of like Amazon X-ray style infographic stuff." Now Koji Fox in that blog says, quote, "Our story is deep and focuses on the characters, but we wanted to make the world feel alive and give reasons for why things are happening. We created a history that goes back over 1,500 years, which influences the story," end quote. This very in-depth feature is integrated throughout and will allow you to pause the game at any point, even mid-cutscene, and get tailored lore prompts to refresh your memory on characters that were just mentioned, a nation's history, or a particular event that took place. Koji Fox concludes that, quote, "We have hundreds of entries available, but players can also choose to ignore them and enjoy the game without feeling bogged down," end quote. Takai says that side quests won't feel like filler. You won't have to go around and find 5 leather pelts, for example. Instead of fetch quests, the optional content will offer players a way to learn more about the game's world and characters. Now I have to bring it up once again, but since it is a big inspiration for the director Takai, God of War and its recent sequel Ragnarok does side quests better than most, if not the best, each one being super meaningful to the character development and world building. For example, completing Freya's side quest really connects you to her story and her involvement with key aspects of the main story, but it's completely optional for the player to choose not to do these quests. Another example being the side quests that strengthen the themes or bonds between Kratos and Atreus. It's just really cool that Final Fantasy XVI seems to have taken this to heart and applied it. In an interview with CNET by Sean Keane, localization director Michael Christopher Koji Fox says, quote, "We have a character that gathers lore. He will tell you about what's going on in the game, characters, places, history, things like that. It doesn't affect the story, it doesn't affect gameplay, but for those players that want to go deep and find out what happened 200 years ago, why these countries hate each other, you can do that," end quote. This could be the bard that Koji Fox mentioned in an interview to Gillen McAllister of the PlayStation blog a few months ago. One of Koji Fox's favorite characters, quote, "would have to be the bard who sings of Clive's exploits. Originally, this NPC was simply supposed to recite vague poems depending on where Clive happened to be in the main scenario, but we thought it would be fun to have him sing the lines in true spoony bard fashion. And all this for a random NPC that some players may never even speak to once in the game," end quote. Now I'm assuming this bard will appear in all the hub locations, kind of like turning the corner and seeing Chadley everywhere in Remake. But I love that Koji Fox says that some players may not even hear him sing. I love having that unique player experience I can share saying, "Oh yeah, the bard is in this district and the song he sang was so good. I can't believe you missed that. You gotta go back and listen to it." On the subject of favorite character, Yoshida tells Gematsu, quote, "My favorite character is a character that we haven't introduced yet. So I can't tell you too much about them, but I can tell you that it is an older character in the game, not very young. We talked before about how the game has this very dark feel, but this character is very, very lovable. Kind of comedic in a sense. And that's why I love him, because he brings that light to the darkness." End quote. Speaking of people you will meet in Final Fantasy XVI's world and some light-hearted aspects, In Rina Asami's interview on Game Watch, translated by Turquoise Hammer, Yoshida says that there wasn't much of it in the press demo, but the full release includes some cringe-inducing try-hard lines typical of Final Fantasy dialogue that will make you feel like a middle schooler. Some of them may make you cringe with embarrassment, but I think that is what it means to be Final Fantasy. End quote. I agree with you, Yoshida. I'm glad that's in there. Yoshida tells Gematsu, "You have these themes of brotherly love and the love of a nation, love of others, these friendships, these bonds, and these things that you've come to expect from the Final Fantasy series. There are portions that you are going to get deeply emotional. And there are also lighter parts, because when you talk about a story that's dark, it's always about finding hope in the darkness. And there's a lot of hope in this game as well. But for me, as someone who is going to be 50 years old this year, I know that the world isn't all sunshine and rainbows."
Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it.
Back to the quote. "I know that it can be tough sometimes, as well as have hope in it sometimes." Yoshida also said, "We have some very dark themes that the story revolves around. We have countries at war. We can't really have some blitzball matches going on when people are killing each other. And you can't have this hero who's driven by revenge be like, I'm gonna go out and fish." In that sense, there aren't those types of light things that are going to detract from the story that we are trying to tell. Now this stirred up some fans as if Yoshida was throwing some shade on the previous games. Of course, Final Fantasy X was a game about the cycle of death, and Final Fantasy XV did a great job of contrasting the lighthearted personalities of the Chocobros against the bleak setting. But one look at Final Fantasy XIV, the other Final Fantasy that he produced, and you will know that he is very passionate about all of the past games. The point of this statement is to emphasize that they are going all in on creating a fantasy story that feels grounded and realistic interpretation of a world at war and on the brink of dying out entirely. Sal Romano of Gematsu asks, quote, "You use the words constants. Were there a series of constants at the start of development that the team said, no matter what we do, these have to be in the game?" End quote. Now Yoshida responds to that, quote, "Chocobos, Moogles, and then some of the ships, like the Enterprise. We haven't said anything about the Enterprise, but you know, you can assume that maybe we'll have an Enterprise." I think that one might have slipped, I don't know. And then, of course, the magic names, and also weapon names, monsters like Marlboros and Behemoths, they'll be there too. Now, I had theorized in my art analysis of Clive and Jill in the sky that were sitting on what I thought was going to be an airship. And that could be the Enterprise. Isn't that freaking awesome to think about? It looks like we will take to the skies in Final Fantasy XVI. I mean, you got this rich lore and world setting of Valisthea and the continents, and just there's more. It's a whole new world. All right, time for rapid fire story information, recap, highlights, exciting things. Hiroshi Takai, director of Final Fantasy XVI, says that there's a civilization called the Fallen, and you get to see the remnants of that fallen civilization throughout the land, and you learn a little bit more about that civilization as you explore the game. Yoshida says there are some battles with some enemies that are very large, and maybe things that players will not have seen before, or maybe not even seen before in the series. There is a feature that allows you to navigate to any location that you want on the world map. He jokes that creating an open world Final Fantasy XVI on that scale would have taken another 10 years to develop. So it's cool that it looks like fast travel is going to be in there. Icons are not just about battle. In Final Fantasy XVI, we deeply explore the backstories of each of the dominants who carry the icons. What drives them? What's their aspirations? What are their desires? How do their respective nations treat them? Some are revered as heroes while others make them slaves. One thing that can be said about all of them, though, is that they are powerful, akin to weapons of mass destruction, capable of destroying an entire realm if left unchecked. Luckily, however, the dominants check each other, creating this delicate Cold War type balance. Man, I am so hyped for this story. I'm all for the whimsical, lighthearted Final Fantasy games. And my favorite one being this very, very, very mature game, but it's also got a cat avatar riding a giant stuffed animal. So, I do love that about Final Fantasy, and that is essential Final Fantasy, so I do understand a lot of the concerns coming in. But hopefully in this little highlights that maybe you heard Yoshida say something that you were like, ah, okay, I do like the fact that they are going to leave you with a sense of hope in a dark world. And then also Yoshida's favorite character being somebody who's a little bit on the comedic side. I imagine this character kind of as like the Yoda of Final Fantasy 16, who maybe knows more about the lore, maybe knows about the dominants and what their purpose is, maybe knows what the icons truly are. Maybe this person will be able to answer all the questions. Maybe this person is Leviathan's dominant. That's my theory. Anyways, I guess I'm just at that point in my life that I want this raw, gritty, dark telling of a tragedy and how these characters navigate a cruel and unforgiving world. How will we find hope in this world? Because honestly, that's just what I need. I need something to resonate with the real world and show me, as Yoshida says, that I can move toward tomorrow no matter what has happened.
You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
So if you're hyped for Final Fantasy 16, hit the thumbs up button. Comment with what you are most excited about when it comes to Final Fantasy 16's visuals and audio, and I may feature it in the next video. Equip a subscription and ring the bell of timely notifications. Thank you so much for watching. Take care now. Bye-bye. Turquoise hammer translate a turquoise hammer translate a, why can't I say that?